In the last 10 years,
Right.
Different sponsors have run wars on this very subject. The result is we lose. When I was on a congressional commission looking at the national defense strategy in 2018, we said this. If we entered in a war with China, the losses to personnel and high capital assets would be on a scale not seen since World War II. We would be challenged to win, and indeed we could lose.
When the only constant in life is change, you need to be ready. This is the Man-Made Survival Show.
Welcome back, everybody. My name is Jose Prado of Man-Made Survival, and I really do appreciate that you came back to the channel and watched this video because I have a lot of information that I need to share with you today. So I would really appreciate it if you can share this information with your friends and family all throughout your social media because they also need this information. Because not only do they need to know what is happening, but they also need to know how to prepare for it. And that's exactly what I do in this podcast, because I have actually listened to other podcasts, other preppers, other analyses, and even though they are acknowledging the headlines that I'm going to be sharing with you today, they're not giving people, any type of guideline or any advice on how to prepare for what I'm going to be talking about today. So I really do hope that you stay all the way to the end and you share this with your friends and family. And also please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment, like the video, so that can give the algorithm the go ahead to put it up in the front, because then that means that people are watching it and they're getting, what they need off of it. So I would really appreciate if you could do that for me. Now, 2020 really taught many people that it's very wise to be prepared, because millions of Americans were not prepared at all, and when the pandemic hit, they were caught off guard. But, not just the pandemic, but everything that followed, with people freaking out and going to the grocery stores and pretty much cleaning it out. Many people went and cleaned it out, but the other people did not have anything. The memes came out and the, I guess you can say the public service announcements came out saying to leave something for the older people, or at least other people with kids, and the list came out. But preppers were ready. They didn't have to go to the grocery store and scramble with everybody else to try to catch whatever it is that's still on the shelves. Preppers were wise. They already had everything they needed, and pretty much 2020 proved that preparedness is a wise thing to do, that it's necessary for everyone to be prepared at some level. Here in the Man-Made Survival community, I teach you that really everything should be focused on the supply chain, because I define the supply chain different than most people may even have ever heard of. The supply chain is not only food, but it also includes water, power, and medical, because all four of those give you a service. And if one of them or all of them are taken out of the society, the standard of living in the United States will be reduced greatly. And that's exactly what Texas proved. So what I've been teaching you here is not only that you have to make sure that your preparedness has the supply chain at its core, but also you take care of the 14 categories that I teach you here, which also include the 4 that I've described in the supply chain. So that's why it's important for you to prepare and have the information, but prepare it properly, especially for all the people who are new preppers, who saw everything that happened in 2020 and everything that's happening in 2021. So if you're a new prepper, I really do encourage you to go back to the Texas video that I did and get the 14 categories that I talked on there, because I went into greater detail that I'm going to be doing it here. Because I really do believe that now that we have a bigger, broader community of preppers in the United States, we all have to have a foundation to follow. And I do believe, because Texas proved it, that what I've been teaching you with the foundations that I give you will help you get prepared for anything. Because from there, from the 14 categories that I give you, I'm just going to go ahead and read them out to you. The 14 categories: alliance, plan, food, water, medical, tactical, communication, energy, survival, training, bug out back, bug out vehicle, bug allocation, hygiene, and clothing. Those 14 categories, once taken care of, you can actually branch out to whatever it is you're preparing for. Because, there's people who prepare for natural disasters such as tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, stuff like that. But really, what I teach you here is that there's 5 things that you should really focus on, because those are the ones that have the greater impact on society as a whole. not just the one area where a hurricane happens or a tornado goes through, right? Because if you prepare for war, nuclear detonation here in the United States, an invasion, an EMP, an economic collapse, then once you take care of all those, you're going to be better off than millions of people all throughout the United States. Because you will understand that you have to make sure that you have a self-sustained system that will help you survive all of that. Because if we have a nuke go off, but no invasion, but we do have a war, it's going to change society very, very quickly. Right? You might have a draft here in the United States that's going to send millions of fathers and children into the war because the war has gotten that big. But meanwhile, they are sent off. The supply chain here in the United States would be crippled for the people who stay behind. So that is the importance for you to prepare in those 5 that I just given. One of the ones that we're experiencing right now is the fact that we're going through an economic collapse. You have to make sure that right now, while the prices are still affordable, while you're getting the stimulus, that you put a system in place that's going to help you be self-sustained and help you live as if you're living in a third world country. Because if you set that up, if you set the system up today, once we do evolve into being a third world country, you're going to be better off than millions of Americans all throughout the country who are going to be caught off guard. So that is the reason that I teach preparedness in that way, that I share preparedness in that way. And I really do hope that you take this, what I'm teaching you, and you pass it on to your friends, family, your children, all right? And you share it all throughout your social media. Because right now we have the opportunity to prepare, to make sure that we live as if we're living in a third world country. That you have chickens, you have goats, that you have sheep, that you have cattle, that you have rabbits, that you have a garden big enough to feed you, your family, and hopefully your community. That you have communications, that you have energy available. Because those are the things that are going to be most important once we no longer have the standard of living that we have right now in the United States. Because many people are realizing that, especially the people who are in the business of making sure that they have the analysis available for companies or for stockbrokers or whatever it is. So once they do that once they do that, once they do that research, we can piggyback off those and bring you that information and give you the warning that they're giving. All right. So if the United States dollar decreases in value and we have inflation, then other goods are not going to be, in reach to be able to buy. If we go a step further into hyperinflation, the standard of living for 90 or 95% of Americans will crumble very, very quickly overnight. That's all the examples that we have seen in countries in modern history. So we are headed that way. It's just a matter of time when. I don't know when it's going to happen. It can happen in the next 3 to 5 years. It can be another 10 years. How much longer can we print infinite money until the day that it collapses? We don't know. But it feels like we're very close. That same feeling that we have with the economy, we have with war. Because, now the generals have come out and they talk about the war games that they've done. China has come out and told its military to get ready for war that is imminent now. So if we prepare for those 5 that I've given you, even if they don't happen in our lifetime, that information, those preps that we've accumulated, we can pass it on to the next generation. It could be our kids or our grandkids. And even if they don't use it, they can pass it on. All this information, all this accumulation can be passed from one generation to the other. So that's exactly what we got to do. Now with war is going to be fought. If it is fought in the United States, then you have to make sure that you position yourself to where you're outside of that. Because there's different stages when it comes to an invasion. That's exactly what we saw in Iraq. And we've seen, in other countries all throughout history. First, you land at the shore. So if you live anywhere between the East and the West Coast, or, in the East or West Coast, then you have to make sure you move away from there, or at the very least, you have a place to go when it's time to flee. Because those are going to be the very first places that are going to be attacked. And they're going to be attacked by surprise, because that is where the countries can make a beachhead. The second layer of that would be attacking the major cities such as New York, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Atlanta, maybe Miami, other places all throughout the country, because that not only would that send a message to other countries throughout the world, that would give the greater impact to the citizens of the United States, and that would devastate, not only the country but also the politicians, or at least the defense military that we have, because they would understand that our defenses have been breached. So that is the reason why you have to make sure that if you live in any of the major cities, you can move out, even if you have to travel an hour to work back into the city. And that way, even if you are at work when something happens in the major city, if you're lucky to survive, you can make your way back home, and you're going to be further away from the initial disaster, even if it's not the first point of entry for any invading country. The next layer that you have to think about this is if you live anywhere near a nuclear power plant or a military base that hosts any type of missile silos, then you're well away from that. Because if the enemy identifies where the missile silos are, then those are the very first ones they're going to attack, because they're going to try to prevent any missiles from coming out. The most famous ones that we know of, they're in Arkansas and they're in Montana. Of course, they're spread out all throughout the United States and they're top secret. But the point is that you can see the military activity. So if you're anywhere near that, you should get away as far away as you can. And with the nuclear power plants, not only can a cyber attack make one of those melt down, a direct attack would do it too. And the United States grid pretty much has, three major components, which would be the West, the East, and Texas. We know Texas failed very easily with cold weather. How much easier will the East and West Coast power grid fail? Or how much easier will they fail? So my point is that there's different layers to a nuclear war against a superpower like Russia and China, and the steps that they would take for them to have a successful invasion. All right, so those are the things that I didn't hear anybody else talk about while I was listening to it, because it didn't really seem like they understood what could be done or how things would turn out to be. So when I was sitting there listening, I was pointing those out as they were talking about it, which is what I'm pointing out now. Now, the final layer to all of this is that the country who are invading, if they are successful and they win a war against the United States, once they already gone through the citizens and the military and everything like that, they would come for their spoils, which would be the food and the water. All the farmland in the United States they would try to take, and all the rivers and streams and everything like that they would try to take too, especially China, because for one, they have a space issue. They have 1.5 billion people. A lot of people are very crammed in major cities. And if they were to take over the United States, they could actually bring millions of people to the United States and take it over. Or they can use the farmland to ship a lot of food out there for free. And the same thing for water, because they're having problem with both food and water. So if there was to be a war between the United States, Russia, and China and NATO, and they were successful at beating us, that's exactly what they would go for. So you would have to see where you live in that entire layer, and you can make plans accordingly. So if you live in the coast, try to move away if you want. That would be my advice. If you live in a major city, same thing. If you live anywhere near a nuclear power plant, get away, because if they melt down or they get attacked, then you're going to be suffering. If you live out in the country, in the breadbasket of America, just understand that you may be the last one to be attacked, but you will see, troops and tanks rolling through your streets, and they're just going to take it over. They're not going to ask, and they might shoot you on the site. That's what happens in war. All right, so we have to make sure that we understand all of this. Now, the first headline that I have for you is important, because here in the next few days, maybe by the time I edit this and I release it, might be too late, but I hope not. Hopefully I release this by Wednesday, so you can have this information before the big meeting. But there's going to be a big meeting between Russia and China. And this headline comes from Zero Hedge, and it says, "Friends again? U.S.-China to hold top-level reset meeting in Alaska. Even if he hasn't been quite as aggressive as his predecessor, President Joe Biden has promised the American people that he will retain President Trump's skeptical posture towards Beijing, which is widely regarded as America's biggest geopolitical foe. Meanwhile, President Xi has presented ahead with plans to democratize Hong Kong, while both Xi and other top CCP officials have ratcheted up warlike rhetoric as the CCP sets its sights on reclaiming Taiwan. However, given Biden and his family's long-standing ties to China, it's hardly a surprise that Beijing would seek a reset in relationship with the United States. And the reason that that is important is because we are sending our top dog out there with the meeting, and so is China. So this is a very significant meeting because, for one, it came out of nowhere. It was kept under wraps until somebody leaked it, and it's making a lot of people speculate what is the reason behind this meeting. Could it be Taiwan? Could it be Russia? Could it be a war against the Chinese people? You know, what could cause them to come together and meet? That is just information that's going to come out in the next few days. But we have to wonder what that is. If they're sending their top people, their top officials, to do some type of negotiation or whatever it is, what are they after? So we really have to pay attention to that one because it's going to be important. The article goes on to say, notably, the South China Morning Post says the talks will likely be held in Anchorage, Alaska. Why Anchorage? Well, apparently the Chinese are keen on Alaska because it's equidistant to Washington and Beijing, while still being outside of the U.S. mainland. This, in theory, would make it easier for the government and its propaganda apparatus to portray the talks as having taken place on neutral territory, while also allowing the diplomats to avoid heavy scrutiny from the press. Now, the funny thing about that is that they want to go to Alaska because they are saying that's like neutral ground with the United States, to where they can come with some type of agreement, or what kind of, middle ground are they trying to find? So I guess we're just going to have to wait and see. Maybe they are just, doing some type of political theater for the Chinese people back at home, or for the leaders back at home. But for us, it really makes us wonder what's the deal with Alaska. Okay? Why do they feel like that's the middle ground? So there's different things that we can wonder why they're meeting. And as I mentioned a minute ago, it could be either Taiwan or it could be Russia. And I have this headline for you, which I'm not going to get into the details of the article, but I'm going to give you kind of like an overview. This is from yahoo.com, and it says, top U.S. commander fears Chinese invasion of Taiwan by 2027. So the silver lining in these articles that are coming out, even though they're ominous, there's a great potential for war, is that they're giving us a timeline. If the U.S. commanders believe that we're going to be going to war in the next 6 years, then that gives you more of a reason to prepare with a sense of urgency, but not panic. Okay? Because panicking never resolves anything. But you can have this information, you can think with a cool head, and make your moves accordingly. So if if China does invade Taiwan by 2027, you already know we're going to go to war against them by 2027. And the funny thing is that Joe Biden wouldn't be the president if he didn't win re-election. It would be somebody else. So we would have to wonder, what are they going to do if they win an election in 2024? And this would be towards the end of their term. And if we go to nuclear war against China, then they're going to stay longer in office. And we will just have to wait and see who the next leader would be. And if it's Joe Biden that he wins re-election, then that means he's going to stay longer than 8 years in office. So the top U.S. commanders have set the timeline because of all the aggressiveness that China has been doing. With invading this airspace, with trying to take over the South China Sea, with saying that they're going to take over Taiwan eventually. That is the reason why top officials are warning the military to be prepared for that. But I'm wondering, is that the reason why we're meeting in Alaska to talk about Taiwan? Or could it be this other headline that I have for you? Because this one is even more important than Taiwan, and you'll see why. Report, U.S. preparing cyber attack against Russia over SolarWinds hack. This from antiwar.com. According to a report from the New York Times, the Biden administration is planning cyber attacks against Russia in the coming weeks. The cyber offensive could come with new sanctions and would mark serious escalation towards Moscow from the new administration. Anonymous U.S. officials told the Times that the first major move is expected to happen over the next 3 weeks. It will consist of a series of clandestine actions across Russian networks that are intended to be evident to President Vladimir Putin and his intelligence services and military, but not to the wider world. The planned cyber attack is being framed as retaliation for the hack of the software firm SolarWinds that affected several U.S. government agencies. The SolarWinds hack was discovered late last year. It was immediately blamed on Russia by members of Congress and Western media outlets, despite a lack of evidence that showed Moscow was responsible. All right, so that is a very important piece of all of this, which is the most important to me from everything, because if we are in fact going to have a physical cyber attack, then that could make Russia do the same thing against us. It is alleged that Russia hacked all of our nation's agencies, all of our nation agencies. They supposedly got into the Pentagon. They got into our energy sector. They got to other very important agencies all throughout the United States. If they did get in, what type of information do they have? Do they have war plans that we have against them? How about war plans against China? How about they got our nuclear codes, or they have a way to turn off our power grid? If they did in fact get in, and they were there for months, because the reports came out saying that they were there for a very long time before it was discovered. If they were there, how many bugs did they plan in there? You know, how many software bugs and everything like that, for them to be able to just access it remotely and turn off our grid? That is a possibility. Now, what we're saying is that we're going to do that against them. We're going to do it in a way where where the broader population is not going to notice, but only the military and other services or other agencies in Russia. But what if we decide to turn off their grid? What if we decide to, attack something else that is going to be valuable to the Russian government that will force them to retaliate against us? So that's how the war can start very, very easily against Russia. And we're saying that we're going to do that in the next 3 weeks. That is just crazy talk. Are they going to do it? We don't know. If they do it, will Russia say anything about it? We don't know either. Will they, instead of announcing that they're going to do it like the United States did, will they retaliate in secret? Those are the questions we have to ask ourselves, because we have to make sure that we prepare accordingly. How can you prepare for a cyber attack against Russia? By preparing for a cyber attack against the United States. And the main thing that happens during a cyber attack is that the power goes off. It can go off for several hours, to several weeks, to several months. It depends how strong of an attack it is and how effectively can our forces fight against it and restore power. We don't know, because we're not in the military, and I'm pretty sure that's top secret information. But we will have to make sure that we're ready for the time that the time goes off. We're ready for the time that the power goes off to the time that the power grid comes back on, depending how long it may be. In that time period that the power will go off, here in the United States, the main thing that we will have to worry about here, at least in your house, would be your food that you have in your refrigerator and your freezer. That would be the first thing to go. But once that effect lasts for several weeks, for several days, it could escalate to where people don't go to work that entire time, because computers and nothing else will work. In the United States, businesses are heavily reliant on computer power. Another thing that can happen is that even if 18-wheelers do have the capability of going through stores, the stores won't be able to have a way to process the payments. So that's going to be something that they're going to have to figure out either before then or on the fly. And what happened in Texas is that they said that they didn't have, a way to process any payments, so they were just asking people to pay with whatever it is that they have cash on hand. Some people left with free groceries. Some people paid as much as they could. But the point is that would be one of the biggest issues if there was to be a cyber attack against the United States that would turn off the power. So that is the reason why you have to prepare for a cyber attack as well. The next headline that I have for you just goes to show that things can shift from not only being Russia, but also being an issue that we would have with China. Because China has been getting ready for a war against the United States for for many years, for at least 10 years that we know of. And technically, now that I think about it, they have actually said in the 90s that the first thing that they would do against us is to hit us with an EMP, because they understand that the United States society relies heavily on the power grid. And if our power grid gets knocked off, it is proven by the Congressional EMP Task Force that if an EMP is detonated over the United States where all the power grid gets turned off for, let's say 2 years, that within that 2-year period, over 95% of American population would perish for the simple fact that American people would have no food, no water. And there would be chaos in the streets, and people would be fighting against each other, and they would try to get the things that they need for their family, creating conflicts. And from that point on, there would be a civil war breakout. And whoever detonated that EMP, they would just have to wait for us to kill ourselves. And then they come in, invade the United States, and whatever population is left over, just take it over or just kill it off, whatever it is. Because 95% of 320 million people will leave a very small amount of people scattered all throughout the United States. It'll be easier for whatever invading army to be able to take it over. This headline comes from Zero Hedge. It says, unmistakable message. Top U.S. Admiral reveals test of China carrier killer ballistic missile. The top U.S. commander over the Indo-Pacific region of operations has revealed new intelligence before the Senate panel on Tuesday that China's military test launched an advanced anti-ship ballistic missile into the South China Sea. The previously undisclosed launch occurred in August last year and was meant to send an unmistakable message to Washington, according to Indo-PACOM Commander Admiral Phil Davidson's testimony. Quote, this mid-range anti-ship ballistic missile are capable of attacking aircraft carriers in the Western Pacific, end quote. Davidson said he specifically described the DF-21D missile test that, quote, their employment during a large-scale PLA exercise demonstrates the PLA's focus on countering any potential third-party intervention during a regional crisis, end quote. As Bloomberg describes of his testimony further, it marks a, quote, turning point for the PLA Army, the capability of which has been underestimated in prior Pentagon assessments. And the reason that is really important is because we have always had a pride in how many aircraft carriers we have. And if China is suddenly able to take them all out, then that is going to put us at a great disadvantage if we have a war. If China ever decides to actually take over Taiwan, then they're going to be using those weapons against the carriers that we have out there, because we don't have that strong of military presence. Really what we have is just several aircraft carriers that go through it and several airplanes, but we don't have a full force that is pretty much patrolling the entire South China Sea. So if, let's say, in 2027, they do in fact go in there and they do invade Taiwan, we will have to make sure that we have everything in place before then in order for us to have a successful fight. But that does not seem like that's the case. Now, China, even though we're having talks with them in the next several days, they're getting prepared. They're making sure that their military is ready for war at any time, which is something that we're not doing here in the United States. And actually, the military has become the center of a woke movement that could potentially cripple the United States, because we're worried about issues, or the military is worried about issues that should not be worrying about that much, because there's other more important pressing things going on in China right now. I mean, we're about to meet with the top people from China to talk about whatever it is that we're going to be talking about. And yet the U.S. military is worried about everything that they're worrying about right now with transgenderism and all that other stuff. I mean, it might be important it might be an issue that they have to address, but it seems like it's consuming a lot of their time. So I guess we're just going to have to wait and see how that goes. And in the next few days, the information will come out on what exactly they talked about, because I'm sure there's going to be, photo ops and public discussions and everything like that after they have their meeting. So anyways, going back to China. This headline comes from Zero Hedge, and it says, Xi alerts military, be prepared to respond in current unstable and uncertain situation. All right, and just going off that headline real quick, that is something that we have been saying here in this podcast for a long time, and actually the military has been saying for a long time, including NATO. NATO is putting their crosshairs on China, maybe because they don't have a lot of action with Russia, and they want to get involved with what China is doing. But the point is that China understands that if we go to war against them, they're also going to have to go to war against NATO. And they have plenty of weapons for them to be able to use. Whether it's political weapons or it's actual missiles, they have plenty of things that they can do. And they have a big enough army to be able to take care of something like that. I mean, they have 1.5 billion people, and, they make no apologies on being able to draft anyone they want at whatever age. Because in the past, history proves that they had kids fighting in previous wars. So the article goes on to say, during the major annual legislative session in Beijing on Tuesday, President Xi Jinping addressed top leaders of the People's Liberation Army, telling the military it must be prepared to respond in increasingly difficult and complex security challenges facing the nation. The current security situation of our country is largely unstable and uncertain, Xi said in the address, which comes 2 days after Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi gave his own fiery warning to the same assembly, saying the U.S. is crossing lines and playing with fire on Chinese sovereignty over Taiwan. President Xi continued, the entire military must coordinate the relationship between capacity building and combat readiness, be prepared to respond to a variety of complex and difficult situations at any time, resolutely safeguarding national sovereignty, security, and development interests, and provide strong support for the comprehensive construction of a modern socialist state, according to the South China Morning Post. If China is preparing for this, what is the United States Army doing, or the military as a whole doing, to make sure that we are ready to go to war against them? Right now, the main sector of the military that is focused in the South China Sea would be the Navy and the Air Force, because we have our ships out there, and the aircraft carriers have the airplanes with them, so it's both of them working together. So what are we doing, or what is the military doing to understand and make sure that we have the assets available all around the region to make sure that if we do go to war against China, we're going to be ready for it? We have been talking to Australia, India, Japan, and one other country I can remember right now about creating a coalition that would be a type of NATO but for Asia, or at least for China, because China would be the focus. Right now, the United States has been unsuccessful. Japan has actually said that they do not want any type of missile systems in Japan. The reason being is because they understand that they would be one of the very first targets, that would be hit with an ICBM if China and the United States were to go to war. India would want to have one, and they're actually working on something like that because, right now India and China are having conflicts. And for the United States, what it would be advantageous is that India and China do share a border. So it would be, important for them to have a type of missile system that would very easily cross the border into China as a deterrence against China, to make China think twice before they do something against the United States or Taiwan. And in Australia and China are having a lot of problems with exports. The reason being is because of this coalition that I just mentioned. So it kind of seems like Australia is saying in words that they will support the United States, but in actions, it looks like they want to stay away from that as much as they can. So this war is eventually coming. And we have to prepare as a population for the day that happens. Because if this war comes to our soil, what are we going to do? How are we going to react? How is the military going to react? Because if we do have a war against China, more than likely we're going to have the draft here in the United States. And we're going to see many fathers, mothers, sons and daughters be drafted and going out there to fight a major war. That's going to be a major war. Because more than likely it would be Russia, China against NATO and the United States. And the ICBMs will fly everywhere very quickly. That is the reason why Einstein said that he doesn't know what weapons are going to be used during World War III, but he knows that in World War IV, we're going to fight with sticks and stones. With the limited information that Einstein had back in those days, he could make the conclusion. What would he say right now if he was alive? He probably wouldn't even think that there would be any more humanity left in this planet. That's why we have to make sure we're ready. But we have to understand what is happening with the U.S. military. The U.S. military has actually come out and said that in the war games that they have done, in the simulations and everything else, we lose a war against China. And that's something that I've warned here in the past, because that is not the first time they've done that warning. So what the military has done is that they have actually looked 10 years into the future with simulations and war games, and a bunch of other things that they use. 10 years from now, they see themselves losing against China. That is the reason why I believe that they must go to war against China before that happens, in order for the United States to still have the upper hand if there was to be a war between China and the United States. Because that makes sense, right? If you know your enemy is going to be stronger than you, then you have to hit them before they get stronger than you, so you can still win. There's going to be no sense for you to try to fight your enemy once you know they're stronger than you are. That might be a deterrence in the future for the United States. But so for now, it's more than likely that we'll go to war against them. It all depends on how fast China can develop their military, their weapons, how much more influence they can have all throughout the world. All those factors are going to have to get in there, because China has a very extensive network of influence all throughout the world. It has come out to be known that China has over 1 million, or actually over 2 million agents all throughout the world, in companies and in governments. So that was going to be a big major issue in the future if we were to go to war against them. Because if they have embedded people in the Pentagon, if they have embedded people in NATO, and any other coalition, then they would be able to get their hands on where the nuclear silos are, what the nuke codes may be, how to turn it off, do certain things. So let's hope that the military does shift its focus from being in the Middle East and prepare for a war that seems like it's coming. Because if it comes, we're going to lose it. And it might be before the next 10 years. It may be maybe even before 2027, like the top general said, with Taiwan. What if it's in the next 4 years? That is the reason why we have to be prepared. That is the reason you must have food, water, the whole list that I gave you, the whole 14 categories. Your alliance, plan, food, water, medical, tactical, communication, energy, survival training, BOGA bag, BOGA vehicle, BOGA location, hygiene, and clothing. Once you have those covered, everything else will fall into place. So please make sure you have that ready for when this comes. I'm going to end this podcast with this next video that you're going to listen to, because I really do believe that it will paint a better picture for you on the scope of everything that's going on. So I really hope that you share this information with your friends and family all throughout your social media, because as I've proven, this information, it really is important, because this looks like it's inevitable. And this looks like it's going to happen one day, probably sooner rather than later. So we have to make sure that we understand this information and that we prepare accordingly. So as I've mentioned, just to wrap this up, you have to look at the layers. You live in the coast, you live in a major city, you live next to a military base, you live next to nuclear power plants, or you live, in the breadbasket of America. You have to make sure that you look where you stand and move if you have to. You have to make sure that your location, whether it's your home where you're gonna make your last stand, or you do have the ability to buy a bug out location that it has everything you need. It has enough space for you to have livestock and for you to have a garden big enough for you and your family, for you to have all your stocks in place, with food, also water filters, bug out bags, have your bug out vehicle ready. You have to make sure all that is in place. And those are the steps that you can take for you to be ready for that. Because remember, the supply chain will get affected by it. If it's a cyber attack, they can take out the grid. That's one of the 4. And because they take out the grid, they will take out the grocery stores. They will take out the water company. And more than likely, that will also take out the medical infrastructure. Because even though they do run on backup power when the power goes out, that will only last so long. That is the reason why the supply chain is the core thing that you have to make sure that you prepare around. All right, including the 14 categories that I give you. So that is how you prepare. That is the information. That's how you prepare. That's the steps you got to take. That's the things you have to consider. And you also have to consider the type of weapons that they may use. China has come out and said that the first thing they will use will be an EMP. All right, so we have to make sure we prepare for that. So again, my name is Jose Prado, always ready.
Last fall, the U.S. Air Force played out a war scenario with China, in which China begins its attack by deploying a biological weapon throughout the Indo-Pacific region. The outcome for the U.S. was not a good one, a new report revealed this week. The definitive answer, if the U.S. military doesn't change course, is that we're going to lose fast, Air Force Lieutenant General S. Clinton Hinnett, the Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategy, Integration, and Requirements, told Yahoo News. Many details of the war game remain classified and had not been made public until recently. In the scenario, set a decade into the future, China uses a biological weapon attack that spreads between bases and warships in the Indo-Pacific, and then, under the guise of a major military training exercise, a Chinese invasion force is able to launch a speedy air and amphibious assault to take over Taiwan, while targeting crippled U.S. warships and bases in the region with a hail of missile strikes. The simulation was conducted amid the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic, months after aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt was temporarily sidelined with an outbreak of the virus. Hinnett described a trend between past conflict and this most recent scenario. More than a decade ago, our war games indicated that the Chinese were doing a good job of investing in military capabilities that would make our preferred model of expeditionary warfare, where we push forces forward and operate out of relatively safe bases and sanctuaries, increasingly difficult, Hinnett said. At that point, the trend in our war games was not just that we were losing, but we were losing faster. After the 2018 war game, I distinctly remember one of our gurus of wargaming standing in front of the Air Force Secretary and Chief of Staff and telling them that we should never play this war game scenario of a Chinese attack on Taiwan again, because we know what is going to happen, Hinnett continued. The definitive answer, if the US military doesn't change course, is that we're going to lose fast. In that case, an American president would likely be presented with almost a fait accompli. A fait accompli is a French term to describe a foregone conclusion and is often used in U.S. military strategy contexts to describe a scenario in which an adversary of the U.S. is able to defeat a U.S. strategy before it can even be launched. In the example of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, US military planners sometimes see China's anti-access area denial strategy, A2AD, as a fait accompli that allows China to make major territorial gains in the Indo-Pacific while blocking the US from launching a counterattack. A fait accompli presents a dilemma for the US in whether to escalate conflict further or cede captured territories or objectives to China. Russia's 2014 annexation of the Ukrainian territory of Crimea has been described as a fait accompli, as the annexation was accomplished before the Ukraine or other nations could intervene, and the prospect of retaking Crimea from Russia might then suggest open war with Russia. In its comments about the Chinese war game come on the same week, US Indo-Pacific Command Commander Admiral Philip Davidson said China might try and annex Taiwan within this decade and possibly within the next 6 years. The use of war games has reportedly helped the US better understand how the Chinese strategy in the Indo-Pacific would play out, but some defense analysts are still uncertain the US is heading in a direction to counter China's strategies. Whenever we war-gamed a Taiwan scenario over the years, our blue team, those playing the role of the US, routinely got its ass handed to it because in that scenario time is a precious commodity and it plays to China's strength in terms of proximity and capabilities. David Ochmanek, a senior RAND Corporation analyst and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Force Development, told Yahoo News. That kind of lopsided defeat is a visceral experience for US officers on the blue team, and as such the war games have been a great consciousness-raising device. But the US military is still not keeping pace with Chinese advances. For that reason, I don't think we're much better off than a decade ago when we started taking this challenge more seriously. Ochmanek said China has become increasingly confident in its military and that it is showing its confidence with increased aggression and provocative actions in the Indo-Pacific, such as conducting frequent air operations around Taiwan and closely following US Navy ships operating in the region. Hinnett also said, "We're beginning to understand what kind of US military force it's going to take to achieve the National Defense Strategy's goals, but that's not the force we're planning and building today."
The Man-Made Survival Show.